All right, I think I'm gonna. All right, if I can have everybody's attention, I think we'll get started. Welcome to tonight's community conversation event regarding American democracy and where it's headed. It's a great pleasure to have you here, and my name is Bruce Bowman. A few housekeeping things just to let you know how things are going to go. Our speaker is Dr. Michael Clancy. He's the chair of government and politics at the University of Hartford. He's going to give a presentation about democracy, and then we'll open things up for questions, and you can feel free to ask your question. If you'd prefer to write your question down on an index card, we have some, and just raise your hand and I'll come around and pass one out, or someone will get one to you. I want to thank Johanna Douglas, who just retired, and she should be here shortly. She was very supportive in the concept of having this event here. And also Andrea Leclerc, the new director, and friends of Southampton Library, and also many friends that have supported this initiative. So thank you all for coming and being here. In case of an emergency, since there's only a central aisle, some of you up front, if you need to head out, you can come towards the front and go around the stacks, and that way you can avoid a congestion in the center aisle. So one thing, there's so much to say, but democracy is never a thing done, and that was Archibald MacLeish. He's a poet and was a poet and a writer, and the librarian for Congress for 12 years. And this is something that we need to keep working on to make it work. And so tonight we have a community conversation to reflect on what it means to have American democracy. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Clancy. And if somebody could hit the lights to dim the center here. The one closest to this end.
Oh, that's dark.
You can put the others back on. So just the one closest to me. Perfect. Great.
Well, first of all, thank you all for coming here, and thanks to the organizers, thanks to folks here at the library, and especially to Bruce and his wife, Anne. I met them in September. I gave a similar presentation and a kind of community conversation in Glastonbury, suburb of Hartford. And Bruce and Ann were there, and they came up to me afterwards and said, if we were to organize something up here, would you be willing to talk about it? And I live in Northampton, so I'm a local as well. And I said, sure, I'd be more than happy to. So I'm really happy to be here, but thanks to everybody. So what I want to do is maybe talk for about 25 minutes to kind of outline where I see we are in the country in 2026. And this is very much informed by a lot of work that's done in political science, analyzing democracy and its alternatives. So it's not just really my opinion, but hopefully it sets the stage for a larger conversation that we can have. So in order to do so, if you could hit the next slide. Sorry, we're a little low tech tonight because I forgot my little clicker. This is a definition of democracy I often give to my students. There are, of course, many definitions of democracy. As many of you know, the word democracy comes from the Greek that combines demos, which is the people or the common people, and kratos, which is to rule or power over and the like. So we think of it often as rule by the people. And its alternative, you could hit the next slide, is we usually think of as authoritarianism, that it's kind of polar opposite. Here's a definition of authoritarianism for you. There are others. One of them is regimes that are governed by a small group or individual, a party, a dictator, the army, that minimizes popular input. So if we're to kind of come into this with an open mind, we might ask ourselves, well, how do we know? Can you hit the next slide, please? And the next slide, please. If you're of a certain age and you kind of came of age during the Cold War and the latter half of the 20th century, this is not actually a very difficult question. because the common story was that a government had a civilian leadership, there may be elections, and it's kind of going on, when then suddenly there's a break, a sharp break. Maybe it's a revolution, maybe it's a military coup of one kind or another. The tanks roll up the street toward the presidential palace, the president or the prime minister is arrested, somebody in uniform goes on the national television and announces martial law and all, the legislature is canceled, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's not hard, and that's a very common experience. If you could hit the next slide, just for example, one continent, South America, during the second half of the 20th century. These are all of the countries that experience coups d'etats in military leadership. Many countries experienced these coups twice, even 3 times during this period. So this is kind of how democracy and authoritarianism worked during the Cold War, during the latter half of the 20th century. And again, this light switch metaphor kind of works. It's on, it's democracy, it's off, it's authoritarianism. Well, political scientists have noticed that in the 21st century, something has kind of changed, so that metaphor doesn't always work. Sure, there's still military coups, we read about them in the paper, but a lot of times democracies change into something else, not out of a sharp break, but out of a kind of deterioration along the way. So rather than the metaphor of a light switch, maybe the proper metaphor is a seesaw, where on one hand, if it tips one way, it's democracy, but then maybe it comes up again a little bit and goes the other way and lands in its authoritarianism, or maybe it's in the middle. Or an alternative, if you could hit the next slide, we can also think of as a continuum, where at one end of the continuum is democracy, and at the other end of the continuum is authoritarianism. And countries can kind of move between them, and they may not be in an extreme, they might be in the middle sometimes, or halfway toward one direction or another. It just varies. If you could hit the next slide, please. So in fact, there are a number of different international organizations. They are non-governmental organizations, they are think tanks, they are centers associated with universities that try to measure modern democracy and its alternatives more scientifically, more rigorously. I'm going to talk about the Economist Intelligence Unit, the EIU, that's one of them. What it does is it looks at 5 different areas of democracy. And one of them is electoral processes, free and fair elections. A second is the functioning of government. Third is participation by citizenry. Fourth is political culture. And finally, protection and respect for civil liberties. Within those 5 areas, they look at 60 different variables. They have 60 different measures of how any country in the world is doing in terms of democracy. So they're very rigorous, they're very objective, and they use the same criteria for every country. They come out with an annual edition every year that rates democracy in the world. If you could hit the next slide, please. This slide's a little bit complicated. Not complicated, but there's more to it. This is just a snapshot. What they do is they take these measures, these 60 different measures, they put it into a formula. It spits out a number between 0 and 10 for every country. A country that's closest to 10 is rated a full functioning democracy. If it's at the other end of the scale, closer to 0, it's a full authoritarian regime. Between 1 and 10. Every country, they look at 167 countries each year. And the big takeaway, and this is not only from the EIU, is that during the first 25 years, the first quarter of the 21st century, globally we're seeing a decline in democracy. And in fact, last year, the average score was 5.17 out of 10 among the 167 countries. That's the lowest they've ever recorded since they started doing this work in 2006. So they group them into 4 different areas: full democracies, flawed democracies, hybrid regimes, and authoritarian regimes. I just have 2 snapshots here. One's from 2011, that's in the black, the number of countries, the percentage of countries' population, and the one in the red here is last year, 2025. You can see that just by a little bit, there are fewer democracies, fewer flawed democracies, and there are more authoritarian countries and more hybrid regimes.
I don't know how well that projects for everybody in the back of the room.
Yeah, we can see it.
Can you see it okay?
Okay, great.
Something good.
So if maybe highlight.
Yeah. So just for example, in 2011 there were 53 flawed democracies, and last year there were only 46. And the reason why is because they're moving in the direction toward authoritarianism. So, for example, in 2011 there were 33 countries that were hybrid regimes, kind of authoritarian, kind of democratic, probably a little more authoritarian. Last year there were 36, an increase of 3 countries. And finally, authoritarian regimes in 2011, there were 55 countries. Today there are, or last year, there were 60. So we're seeing this trend toward more authoritarianism. The other think tanks and centers have found exactly the same thing. There's no dispute over this by the kinds of measures that they do as well. So this talks about the US. Where does the US rank? The US is 27th out of, or 28th out of 167. It's between Malta and Chile. And in fact, its number's been going down. So I'm going to show you on the next screen that's maybe a little bit of a better representation. This is the same report from the EIU. A map. Basically, the darker the blue, the more democratic. The darker the red, orange to red, the more authoritarian. The US scored 7.85 last year. It is classified as a flawed democracy, according to the EIU. Now, just to give you an idea, Freedom House, which is a non-governmental organization based in Washington, D.C., does a similar kind of thing. It's actually better known than the EIU. And rather than do a 10-point scale, they do a 100-point scale, and they measure freedom in the world. Between 2010 and 2020, the U.S.'s score went down by 10 full points. Its current score is 84 out of 100. It used to be in the mid-90s. It's still listed as free by Freedom House, but comparatively, for example, the UK scored a 90 and Canada scored a 97. So the US, and they too have seen, as I said, the country declining in these numbers. Next slide, please. One last one that kind of indicates this. This is just measures of the US by 3 of the 4 organizations. This is EIU, that's Freedom House, and that is VDEM. And what they basically all show is a decline in measures of democracy, their measures, since roughly 2005. So by any measure by these organizations, and again, there's much more rigor than used to be done, US democracy is in decline. So if that's the case, how and why is that happening? Can we have the next slide, please? I want to introduce you to a book you may know. It's called How Democracies Die. It came out in 2018. It was written by 2 political scientists at Harvard. And they made the argument in this book that modern democracies, again, decline not out of that light switch where the military steps in, but rather through this deterioration that we see. Next slide, please. So their term for this is competitive authoritarianism. And they describe it this way. And basically what it does is it combines democratic institutions and many democratic practices, but veers increasingly toward practices more in common with authoritarian countries. For example, manipulation of elections, pressure on opposition and independent media, centralization of power into one person or a small group, manipulating, pressuring, and or ignoring the legal system. Another author refers to this as stealth authoritarianism, again distinguishing the new modern brand of authoritarianism from Cold War era repressive regimes. Next slide, please. So they argue, their names are Levitsky and Ziblatt, they argue that we really need to look out for 4 particular things. If you could hit the, yeah, there you go. I got it. Oh, it's not working. Oh, that's a problem. Why don't you hit the arrow and see what happens? There we go. So this is for any country in the world. They say there are 4 things to really be on the lookout for. The first one is rejection of democratic rules of the game. These may be laws, but oftentimes they're rules, they're long-standing practices, they're norms that have been at work for decades, if not longer, where leaders come in and they say, we're not going to go by those rules anymore. We're not going to accept this law anymore. They just kind of flaunt it. Next one, please. The second one is denial of the legitimacy of political opponents. This is a rhetorical device where in a healthy democracy, those in power refer to those out of power as the loyal opposition. We're all looking out for what's best for the country, but we disagree with how you should do that or how we should do that with how you think we should do that. Instead, we start to see a lot more language that refers to the opposition as people who are extremists, who hate the country, are criminals, are foreign operatives, are spies, are terrorists. Next one, please. Thirdly is the engagement, toleration, or encouragement of political violence in a society. And lastly, the readiness to curtail civil liberties of real or perceived opponents, including independent media. So they conclude, quote, the electoral road to breakdown is dangerously deceptive. People still vote. Elected autocrats maintain a veneer of democracy while eviscerating its substance. Many government efforts to subvert democracy are, in fact, legal in the sense that they are approved by a legislature or accepted by the courts. Next slide, please. Now, what's interesting about this book, to me, is that the authors of the book are not scholars of American politics. In political science, people are trained very, very narrowly. You usually study a certain thing, and then oftentimes you study a certain part of the world. One of the authors of the book is a scholar of Eastern Europe, and the other scholar of Latin America. And they saw this competitive authoritarianism emerge in those areas of the world. And they basically said, this is a new model for how democracies die, or how they die. These are some of the leaders that they're really talking about here. But what's interesting is that they turned to the United States beginning in the mid-teens because they started to think some of the things we're seeing in Eastern Europe and Latin America where things are not going so well, we're now afraid we're starting to see in the United States. Next slide, please. So to kind of bring this up to today, again, the book came out in 2018. Last month, they had an article that was published in a journal called Foreign Affairs magazine. And the gist of the article is, in the United States, we're now there. They describe the United States as living in a competitive authoritarianism situation right now. Their evidence is, frankly, has a lot to do with what's happened over the last year. Not only that, but much of it with that. They point to the purging of nonpartisan officials serving within the state in bureaucracies and agencies and the like, and being replaced with loyalists, using those same agencies to attack their political opponents, attacking independent media through legal means, attacking the funders of the opposition in the same way, attacking the legal system and the rule of law, and the increased use of security forces domestically. Overall, they argue this has produced a chilling effect on political life in the United States, with lots of self-censorship and lots of withdrawal from civic life. Now, there's a silver lining to their article. They argue it's not game over. They're kind of sounding the alarm, but they're saying we can save American democracy. We just need to do the right things. And of course, we can talk a little bit more about that going forward. Next slide, please. So I'm influenced by their work. I find it to be pretty prescient. What I came up with is a list of what I call the authoritarian playbook today in the United States. There are about a dozen things here, and we don't have time to talk about them all right now. Some of them are some of the same things that the authors of How Democracies Die talk about, and there are other ones as well. We can come back to this slide if you want to talk about any one of these. But what I'd like to do with the remaining part of the talk here is to just focus on three of these things and to kind of elaborate on those just to illustrate what we're talking about. Next slide, please. So the first one is lawfare and attacks on the legal system. This, of course, is a photo of the attacks on the Capitol on January 6, 2021. So there are two things that are at work here, probably more than two, but two that I want to talk about. The first is flaunting the law through ignoring and threatening courts, plus issuing a range of pardons and commutations for friends, allies, and the connected. The second is using the law to attack political opponents. People like Letitia James, James Comey, Jerome Powell, Lisa Cook, Adam Schiff, now the governor of Minnesota, the mayor of Minneapolis, the list kind of goes on and on. Add to this attacks on law firms, attorneys generals, individual judges across the United States. President Trump himself has threatened and filed civil lawsuits against opponents, including media companies. Saw today just filed a new one against a bank. So these go on. The point of all of this is together they undermine and politicize the rule of law, which is a central facet of any functioning democracy. Next, please. Threats to free and fair elections. First, same photo, because the first element of that is, of course, unfounded claims of electoral fraud and refusal to acknowledge the outcomes of an election, and threats to, in fact, not leave office. That was in the past. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on more now. Next slide, please. We know that President Trump himself has jokingly issued a lot of statements about perhaps canceling the 2026 elections. The one on the bottom right here was from the 2024 campaign. The other three quotes are from the last 2 weeks in various situations that he has been in. And so there are questions about, what's really going to happen in 2026. Of course, we don't know. But what we can talk about is a little bit about what's happening now and what's been happening over the last year. So if we go to the next slide. One of the things that Ziblatt and Levitsky talk about is the manipulation of elections to get the outcome that you want. And elections are really complicated. And there's a real playbook across the world of how leaders, parties, actors can kind of put their thumb on the scale to try to affect the outcome of the election. So I want to talk a little bit about some of those that are happening in the US right now. Some you know, some you may not. If you could click the next thing, please. The first we know quite well, there's been a lot of news about this, is unprecedented mid-century gerrymandering to try to affect National House of Representative races in the coming 2026 elections. This started with Texas, of course. It spilled over into many other states, Missouri, Ohio, North Carolina, attempts in Indiana, talks about Florida going forward. And the Democrats, of course, have responded with some gerrymandering of their own. Regardless of who is gerrymandering, I will tell you now, any gerrymandering is anti-democratic on its face. It just is. Next, please. President Trump has threatened at various points to eliminate early voting, absentee voting, drop-off voting boxes, mail-in voting, and the use of computers for voting and/or tabulating the results of an election. Many of you may know that the Constitution grants states the right and the duty to organize their elections, not the federal government. So that's the reason why voting is different in every state. Registration's different. There are 3 states that use almost exclusively mail-in voting for voting. So it's different. And what President Trump is trying to do with his people is to change that. To the extent that the federal government has any power in running elections, that power is granted to Congress. It's not granted to the executive branch. But President Trump is trying to affect on how those elections are going to take place. Next, please. Something that's more behind the scenes is there's been a concerted effort to try to compile a national database, a voter database, by taking the state's databases of their voter lists in an effort to root out voting fraud. The idea here, sounds like a good idea in practice, right? Or in theory. The idea here is to take state voting rolls and the databases that those are on and to compare them with government databases as well as commercial databases to see if they match. And if they don't match, somebody's on a state roll and they're not on a commercial one or a federal government one, then you throw them off the state roll. Now the problem with this is a lot of the federal databases and certainly the commercial databases we know to be problematic. We know they're not perfect. So in fact, there are 23 current pending lawsuits of the attorneys generals mainly, or the Secretary of State of governments in blue states that are refusing to turn that voter data over. But the Trump administration wants it. Next, the people that are in charge of all of that, by the way, are people who are avowed election deniers from 2020 and 2021. The top people in key divisions of the Justice Department, for example, including the Attorney General, were key election deniers in 2020. And they're the ones who are taking on these kinds of tasks for the government. We can name them if we need to. Next, please. Do you know what Act Blue is? You probably don't. Act Blue is the main sort of fundraising clearinghouse for the Democratic Party. If you don't know, American elections are by far the most expensive of any country in the world. They're super capital intensive. So both parties, in order to survive and in order to elect anybody, raise oodles of money. And Act Blue is the peak Democratic Party organization to do this. One of the first things the Trump administration did when it came into power was it announced that it is investigating Act Blue for unspecified improprieties. This, again, provides a kind of chilling effect about whether or not it's able to do the things that it needs to do to fund the candidates that it wants to fund. Okay, so next, please. Obviously, there's also been hints and lots of speculation about the use of the National Guard, a nationalized National Guard, or other ICE, other federal troops in Democratic cities, Democratic areas when the election takes place. So just to kind of conclude here, the electoral road, this is a quote from Levitsky and Ziblatt again. I read it before, but I want to read it again, having just said this. The electoral road to breakdown is dangerously deceptive. People still vote. Elected autocrats maintain a veneer of democracy while eviscerating its substance. Okay, next, please. I just had that one, just read that. Next, please. Thirdly, attitudes toward violence. Same photo. And that is, again, next slide, please. Oh, okay. Levitsky and Ziblatt, one of their 4 warnings, engagement, toleration, or encouragement of political violence. The way that we're actually experiencing that in the United States right now is through a double standard by elites in power. President Trump and people around him. And the way that that works is through the amplification of violence committed by the left and the minimization of violence that's committed by the right. So I want to give some examples. If you could click on the next item. After Charlie Kirk was assassinated, this is what President Trump said the day of his assassination. He blamed it on the rhetoric that's going around, and that seems quite reasonable. But just a couple of days later, what he said was he turned the assassination to blaming it not on an individual, but on an organized leftist extremist organizations. And through an executive order, he labeled Antifa, quote, a vast domestic terror network. Meanwhile, not that long before, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's governor's mansion was set afire by an arsonist while he and his family were in it. And he and his family almost died. President Trump referred to the person who set that fire as, quote, probably just a whack job. So amplification, minimization. If you could hit the next slide. Somewhat similar, the Speaker of the House of the Minnesota House of Representatives, she was murdered in her home along with her husband. Afterwards, there was no ordering of lowering the flags to half staff. And later, President Trump himself shared on his social media feed a conspiracy theory tweet or video that argued that the person responsible for the murder of those people was not the person in custody, but rather that their killing was ordered by Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Next, please. He, of course, described the J6ers as peaceful patriots before pardoning or commuting the sentences of about 1,600 of them. And next, please. Of course, more currently, after the recent killing of Renee Macklin-Good in Minneapolis, he said that day that she and her wife were probably professional agitators. And a couple of days later, he referred to Good herself as, quote, very radical, very violent, and highly disrespectful, somehow seeming to suggest that maybe she got what she deserved. This is not just rhetorical, but it also involves the levers of government. Next slide, please. Of course, as you probably know, right after the killing of Good, the Minnesota authorities opened an investigation and wanted to work with the FBI. And very quickly, the FBI said it was not going to cooperate with Minnesota policing authorities. And within a couple of days, it is not investigating the shooter, but it has announced an FBI inquiry into the victim and her wife's possible ties to activist groups. Next slide, please. Finally, of course, what's been in the news so much more is the growing and continuing use of state security forces in the streets, domestically, for a number of things, allegedly to keep the peace, but also, of course, as part of the immigration crackdown. So we are seeing, ICE, Customs and Border Protection, along with Federalized National Guard, increasingly deployed across American cities, with President Trump declaring emergencies in places like Chicago, Portland, now Minneapolis, Washington, D.C., et cetera. When President Trump came into office, there were 10,000 people who were agents for ICE. Today, there are 21,000 ICE agents. By the end of this year, there are slated to be 30,000 ICE agents. They report to President Trump and his people. Okay, let's move to a conclusion. Next slide, please. One more, please. I want to introduce you to one more political scientist. His name is Robert Pape. He is a professor at the University of Chicago, and he's an interesting guy. He doesn't study democracy and its alternatives. He studies political violence. He actually, a little bit like Ziblatt and Levitsky, the How Democracies Die guys, he's not an Americanist. He made his name by studying at a really micro level people who join terrorist organizations and what kind of makes them tick, what radicalizes them, what makes an ordinary person say, I want to be part of Hamas, I want to be part of ISIS, I want to be part of Al-Qaeda. And so he's done sort of psychosocial socio studies along with the team. He runs a lab at the University of Chicago. About 15 years ago, he turned his attention to the United States because he was becoming increasingly alarmed at the rhetoric of violence and the use of political violence in the United States. This, by the way, is a photo from 2020 that was in the Guardian newspaper. And it is of the Michigan State House in 2020, where a number of citizens, residents of Michigan, were unhappy with COVID restrictions. And so rather than write a letter to their representative or their governor, they armed up and showed up in the State House and demanding that those shutdown policies be ended. So the reason I talk about Pape is because he argues that beginning in about 2016, we've entered a new era in the United States that he refers to as the era of populist violence. And this is what he argues is a qualitatively different form of political violence in the United States that's tied to our current political moment. It's rhetorical, but it's also real. And the reason I bring him up is because he argues, he's quite familiar with the competitive authoritarianism concept. And he argues of all the ways for democracy to deteriorate, unlike the authors of How Democracies Die, who again have this silver lining that it's not too late, he worries that, unlike that shielded optimism, that this combination of what we're doing politically and our turn toward violence makes that possibility of authoritarianism to become permanent much more possible. Okay, let me stop there, and let's have a conversation.
Can you turn on the light?
Yes.
Thank you, that was very interesting and refreshing. But the question I have is, it does seem like a lot of the targets, other than the structural systematic things, are people of color, LGBTQ plus folks, and I'm just wondering how that ties into perhaps other democracies where people in power, the white supremacist nationalists and all that.
That's a great question. We haven't really talked about this very much, but Pape uses this term populist and populism. Populism is a political phenomenon that makes the argument, it usually emerges in a democracy, and it makes the argument that there's something broken with the current way in which democracy is working. Politicians are corrupt, the parties don't work, and therefore we need people power. We had a period of populism in the United States. There's nothing inherently wrong with populism. But what political scientists have noticed, and historians as well, is that populism can go off the rails in very bad ways. Populism can lead to dictatorship. Populism can lead to other forms of authoritarianism. And when that's most likely to happen is when the people who lead the populist movements, they're often very charismatic. They can be demagogues, not always, but oftentimes that can be the case. And a lot of times they'll talk about real patriots in their country or real citizens in their country, and they will make a distinction between, for want of a better term, friend and enemy. And put differently, under lots of populist movements that threaten to take that authoritarian turn, and these can happen on the left and on the right, by the way, there's often an enemy from within that's identified. Sometimes it's ideological, sometimes it's an ethnicity, sometimes it has to do with sexual preference or identity. It can have to do with lots of different things. We see this in actually lots of different countries in the world that have ethnic divisions in them, for example, where a lot of times, like, if things are going badly in a country, especially if there's just like economic bad times and a deep recession or the like, there's often scapegoats that are identified. And usually they're a certain portion of a population. They might be immigrants. They might be an ethnic group whose great-great-great-grandparents had immigrated across the border, and now, generation after generation after generation of people who maybe speak a little bit of a different dialect or whatever it might be, look different than other people, are often targeted. And I think that that's one way to think about that in what's going on today. I think that the current regime needs an enemy. It actually needs lots of enemies. It finds it useful to have enemies. Immigrants are easy. It's almost predictable because it happens in so many countries and so many places historically. Whenever certain segments of a population aren't doing as well as maybe they think they should be doing, a lot of times there'll be some kind of an anti-immigrant backlash. And opportunistic politicians will often, will jump on that.
Is that true for misogyny too?
Sure, of course, you bet.
We're 1 year into this administration. A lot of damage has been done. We've got 3 more years. How do your authors figure that this can be saved?
How do the authors think it can be saved?
Levinsky.
Yeah. They point to the really.
I'm going to read the book.
Yeah, it's very readable, quite frankly. It's a very easy read. It's for it being written by academics, it's very accessible. Academics aren't always the best writers that are out there, but it's very accessible, and it's not that long of a book. I think that they feel like there are these different choke points in a democracy. Actually, if you can go to the next slide, there's one more slide. This isn't them, but it's some other people. And they really talk about these choke points, and they are everything from protecting elections to standing up, calling things out when the rule of law is broken. It's a protect protect against disinformation, speak the truth to power. I was listening to an interview with somebody else who's actually a historian who sort of shares the views of Levitsky and Ziblatt. And they asked him, what should people do? And he said, well, do the same things that you would do when you find out that your property taxes went way up. Go complain to people, right? Go make your voice heard and let people know that you're not willing to accept it. I mean, we can get into more of this because I have my own views about how to be more strategic about making things work. I mean, you know, I've said a lot of fairly negative things I know about President Trump and the Trump administration, but Lord knows there's lots of blame to go around with what's going on. Members of Congress, members of the courts, leading figures in business. I mean, you know, these are people who have not stepped up. And we need to let them know.
Why haven't they? Why haven't they stepped up?
Combination of short-term interest, wanting to protect their elected seat in the case of members of Congress and other elected leaders. Business people, I think, are, you know, especially with public companies, they're under pressure for, well, how did the stock do last quarter? And so they're like, oh, maybe we'll just go along. They've found what it's like to try to fight back, or, you know, maybe drag their heels a little bit more, maybe during the first Trump administration. Or, you know, the flip side of this is also just pure greed. There are lots of people who are getting rich by going along with the way the wind's blowing right now, for sure. So for various reasons, I would say. Yeah.
Do you think the decline in the polls of the Republicans and Trump is significant? And does that, you know, bode well at all? I mean, I think it's at historic lows.
Yeah, it's a great question.
I didn't hear the question.
The question was about whether or not the current polling for both President Trump and for the Republicans generally is important. I think ultimately the answer comes down to what's going to happen in November. Are we going to have free and fair elections? And, you know, if the answer is no, then who cares what the polls say, right? And, you know, President Trump doesn't seem to care that much about what polls say. He cares about what his supporters want and the like.
Today he was questioning the polls, saying that they're fake.
Yeah, and then that's the other response is I don't have to believe any bad news that I don't want to, of course, as well. You know, I think there are a lot of Republicans who are really scared about what's going to happen to them. You know, the flip side is, have you seen the polling of the Democratic Party recently? It ain't good.
No.
It's people are really unhappy with the Democrats.
Although
So
they're winning elections.
they're winning special elections for sure. And you know, again, predicting the future is dangerous. If there are free and fair elections, we don't really know who's going to show up in November. There could be a load of people showing up. There can also be a lot of people who are like, I don't like anybody who's running for office. I'm staying home. You know, midterm elections generally don't have great turnouts. I would think, you know, some people are going to be highly motivated, but there are probably other people who may just feel like, why go vote for, you know, my elected offices with a bunch of people that I don't like any of them. So who knows? Yeah.
In the beginning, where you showed the ratings of democracies throughout the world.
Yeah.
Just a quick look. I didn't get to look at it that closely, but it seemed to me that socialist governments were scoring much higher.
Like democratic socialist governments?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Scandinavia really steals the show like they do with a lot of things.
Is that across the world?
Switzerland's in the top 5, New Zealand's in the top 5.
Canada was way up there.
Canada's up there. What's that?
New York City.
Well, it's more the sort of like, you know, we're going to take care of the citizen cradle to grave, the quote unquote nanny state.
Is there anything about popular vote?
I mean, they're democracies.
We're not a popular vote.
Yeah, they're many of them are parliamentary democracies. Not all of them. They vary depending on how they work. But
a lot of those countries sort of have a tolerance
tolerance of others and other points of view.
Not so individual.
The authors of that book, they sort of looked at institutional forbearance and mutual toleration, which used to undermine or be behind all the laws that we have, and those are gone. And maybe in those countries there's an acceptance that that's how life should be, that you accept other people, and that's why there's.
I think you're exactly right that there, and we can talk about a lot of different things. A lot of Europe is going through a fair amount of demographic change right now, not unlike the United States. There's a lot of immigration in European countries, and so Sweden of today doesn't look a lot like Sweden of 1980, just for one example. And there's a lot of backlash there too. There's a lot of kind of anti-immigrant parties. So some of what you're talking about is maybe not as robust as it used to be. And some of the support for, providing a social safety net for one's neighbors and community members and members of your country may not have quite as high of support in part of Scandinavia than it used to be. But it's all relative, right? So compared to the United States, it's still quite high. Do you have your hand up?
If you had the power to do so, what changes would you make?
I'm so glad you went. No. He's a plant.
I'm a steadfast Trumper. No. No. To me, I think this creating the Senate was a mistake. I think the Electoral College was a mistake. But what would you do?
It's actually interesting that you raised those two examples. The authors of How Democracies Die came out with a book about 4 years after that book that's called The Tyranny of the Minority.
Yeah.
And what it's actually about is about how the United States has a lot of protections from the Constitution against excesses of democracy. The founders were actually afraid that the people might be swayed by a demagogue and that might do things that are bad for the country as a whole or bad for the money class. Or what if we just all say, hey, we don't want to pay taxes anymore, let's just tax billionaires. If a majority of people, we could very easily think maybe that would happen because a majority of us are not billionaires, right? So we have lots of protections within the Bill of Rights are protections against excessive majoritarianism. Right? They say there are certain civil liberties that we all have that are not up for a vote. But we also have other things like a bicameral legislature that has a Senate that up until the early 1900s was not elected by popular vote. That was only the result of a constitutional amendment. But the United States is one of the only democracies in the world that has a bicameral legislature that's real. A lot of countries have a symbolic second house. They have like the equivalent of our House of Representatives that makes laws. And they might have like a House of Lords or some other kind of Senate or something, but it often has almost no power. And so the real power is through the democratic institution that is the equivalent of Parliament or the House of Representatives. So we have, the unfortunate thing is maybe it's fortunate, we have a lot of different mechanisms within our Constitution that gum up our political works. And what some people want to do is to ungum them up. I mean, a lot of the appeal of President Trump is he's like, yeah, I'm just going to ignore Congress. I'm just going to issue an executive order and we're just going to do things this way. Or, Congress appropriated this money for this thing. I'm just not going to spend it. And in fact, I'm going to take that money, I'm going to spend it somewhere else. Right? The Constitution doesn't really, kind of frowns on that. But he's just doing it, right? The point of the Tyranny of the Minority book, same authors, Ziblatt and Levitsky, argue that politicians in the United States have actually weaponized the minority protections of various kinds to actually make it harder to get much of anything done in our country. And that this is mainly a 21st century phenomenon. That they've done it through things like filibusters and obviously gerrymandering, the Electoral College, a whole range of different things. We could fix those things. It would take a constitutional amendment to fix many of them. And again, compared to other democracies in the world, the US has one of the most difficult mechanisms for changing their constitution. If you look at Mexico, there's something like 500, which is their government structure is modeled after the United States. There's something like 500 amendments to their constitution. Right? We have 28, right? And we haven't had one in 50 years, 40 years. Right? It's next to impossible to pass a constitutional amendment in the United States. So we're in trouble that way for sure. Yep.
How do you think term limits for the judges, Supreme Court, and Congress would impact all of this?
I think it would be mixed. I'd probably be most supportive of term limits for judges. And I think we could regularize it in a way where, every president would be able to appoint a fixed number of judges. It's even. It's not the luck of the draw. Judges serve for a certain amount of term that, could be even be long. It could be 15 years. It can be whatever. And then to kind of move on and have fresh blood. I think, there are a lot of states that have term limits for various offices, including the state legislature. And, it's good to have some fresh blood, but it's also the case that governing is really complex. And the issues that governing tries to deal with are even more complex. And the one thing that some longevity does is it allows people to become experts in different areas. And you need those years to become experts in how to fix the healthcare system, how to deal with environmental issues, how to, restructure the military, whatever it might be. So mixed in that sense.
And changing the judge term limits so that president in a given term is allowed to appoint X number of judges, would that require a constitutional amendment?
I don't want to answer that definitively, but I actually think the answer is no. If you look at the Constitution, Article 3 deals with the courts. It says almost nothing. It's by far the shortest article of the Constitution. It says, the judicial branch of the United States will be embodied by a Supreme Court. It doesn't say how many members are in the Supreme Court. It doesn't mention any other courts. The courts we have today are the result of the Judiciary Act of 1789. They have nothing to do with the Constitution. So, for better or for worse, we could redo our court system tomorrow, I believe.
Dr. Clancy, is there a hope for the future?
Depends on what day we're getting up and if it's a good day or a bad day. You probably could tell I'm rather dark, and I am less optimistic than I was the last time I gave this talk in September. I really am. But I also think it's important to see what's in front of us and to call it by name. I think. I'm not giving up. I don't think that there's nothing that anybody, that it's hopeless, that there's nothing we can do. I can't predict the future, but I think for those of us who want to live in under a better government system, that it's only going to come if we try to make it that way.
Whenever Trump ages and potentially passes away from natural causes, how do you see charismatic figures in the current administration that would be as strong in taking up the banner that he has created of this imperialistic state?
I think about this all the time. And my answer, again, it's dangerous to predict the future. But my answer, I'll do it anyway, is no. There's something about that guy. I don't know what it is, but he's got this ability to attract a large proportion of society by being rude, by being crass, by being mean, by being nasty, and people like it. And I don't see other people having the talent to do that in the same way. I don't know who that would be. I don't want to. I don't want to call him names or anything like that. He's got this unique ability to
I think people are
do what he does.
wearing thin with that attitude, though.
Some are. I mean, other people have pointed out that the one characteristic, I think it's pretty indisputable,
Yeah.
is we're hugely polarized and we're hugely sclerotic about our polarization. Whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, very few people are moving. And even though, there is a middle, it's a pretty small middle, and they're the ones who are determining election outcomes. They did barely in 2020, barely in 2016, and barely in 2024. They're the people who matter. And maybe they're getting tired of them, but what's to come after that? Who's to say? Right? You've had your hand up for a long time.
I was going to say that there's very few politicians on that level of power who have been in the public eye outside of politics for as long as Donald Trump has.
Yeah.
Because he was just a game show host for years. He had literal decades of press and media portraying him as successful.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of those people who, he's sort of preceded today's modern influencer. He was famous for being famous, right?
So I think a lot of people sort of their knowledge of him is basically, oh, he's successful. He has the show about successful people.
Yeah.
He has the gold mansion. He must be on the up and up. He must be smart. He must be all these things. But
Yeah, and
J.D. Vance doesn't have that.
yeah, and he plays the part well, right? He plays the role very well. He plays the same role as he played on The Apprentice in a lot of ways, right? But yeah, so I don't see it in J.D. Vance. I don't see it in Marco Rubio. I don't see it in his kids. I don't see it in Jared Kushner.
Yeah.
They don't have that thing.
Stephen Miller, yeah,
I think he appeals to the common person who wants to say the things that he says but are afraid to say.
I think
Now
it's
they got this guy that's up there and say, I don't like this one, I don't like that one, I'm going after this. I always wanted to do that, and I like him for doing that.
I think there are some people who do, for sure.
And I think the only thing he understands is you gotta come after him, force for force. I think I could see a revolution or a coup. Something's gotta break, because we got 3 more years.
Well, I hope not, because we'd be talking about a lot of violence, and this is an armed up country.
It's, I call him Taco because he just backed off again on Greenland. And he's actually talking and he's saying Iceland. There's something wrong with him.
Yeah.
He's demented or something, and
I can't speculate on his mental status, but feel free to. No, I think it's, whatever happens, if it's a Taco thing, if it's a threat and he has to back away from it, he's Teflon among a lot of his supporters. It just doesn't matter to a lot of the people that are in his corner. They like him, they like his tough talk, they like his bullying.
Vance said a few years ago, he called him Hitler. He was on TV during the debate. He's Hitler, Now he turns the other way. Corruption, power. He's made $1.5 billion. And now with his peace plan, $1 billion, you can get into my peace plan.
That's this week.
Bitcoin.
What about the 25th
I've always said,
Amendment?
anybody that bothers with him, you're either disbarred or you're in jail. And he comes out like a Teflon guy.
He does. You've had your hand up for a long time in the back.
Oh, thanks, Robert. I was going to say, I wondered if you wouldn't mind speaking to the corrupting influence of Bitcoin, which Robert was bringing up, and e-commerce in general. That seems to be funding governments and seem to be funding tremendous rise in autocracy and corruption in the world in general.
Yeah, it's in some ways it's really new, but in some ways it's not. It's in the United States it's pretty clear, it's pay to play. And the crypto people, were very supportive of President Trump because, back in his first term, he was very anti-crypto. But he discovered that, he could get campaign contributions and support from, the people behind crypto. And so he's made some promises. And then he's also, through his kids and through his associates and their kids, He's set up his own companies or found a way to monetize that. That's been the biggest source of that $1.5 billion that he's gotten since he entered office this last year.
Where does tariff money go?
Sorry?
Tariff money, where does that go?
It's supposed to go into the Treasury.
Yeah.
I think it probably does. The latest figures I've seen is that it accounts for probably $200 billion last year.
Where's the oil money going?
Yeah, where's Venezuela?
That's going to Qatar.
Yeah, Qatar.
That's going to a personal bank account. But getting back, it's also really important to note that the just a couple of studies just came out. You probably saw headlines about it over the past 2 weeks. That the overwhelming majority of the people that have paid for those tariffs, that $200 billion, are us.
Yes.
It's not it's not some foreign government that's doing it. Some importers that are American companies, they're paying it and they're eating it, but most of them are passing it on to us. And so what it really is it's just a new form of a tax again for the citizens. The citizens of the country are paying a new tax, and we call it a tariff. And we say that China's paying for it, but they're not. We are. Yeah.
I just want to say I was educated in Southampton and Easthampton schools.
Yeah.
And my teachers are smarter than Donald Trump. Because today, my long-awaited new beret from France that I ordered months and months ago arrived, and I had to pay $34
Just for the tariff part?
The tariff. Well, part of it was the DHL administrative fee.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it really didn't matter to me. I paid $34, and I listened to him, and he kept saying, those guys are going to pay for it. And I said, no, I've been to a lot of schools. I went through 8 years here and 4 in Easthampton and then college, and they all said he's crazy. He's wrong, and I'm waiting for somebody on his side to say, Don, you're blowing smoke.
They get fired when they.
Never
Yeah, that's true.
Well, one thing I've noticed, I just wonder what happens, there's almost a dichotomy that the federal government is a completely different entity now. And then, so what does that mean to local governments and how they function year after year, whether it's Southampton government or Massachusetts government? At some point, there's dysfunction in thinking of it in terms of a national government. Like,
No, it's a great question.
how I just don't know how things will continue to work on a local level.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we've all learned as residents has been like a civics lesson, and that is how integrated national, state, and local government actually is, and especially when it comes to budgets. That at the local level, or whether we're talking about Easthampton or Southampton or Hartford or state of Massachusetts or whatever, all of these entities, they get money from the feds, and it's not like all that money is being halted, but enough of it is being halted in enough of different areas where they're already starting to be, and there are going to be more and more fiscal crises at the town level, at the state level, because the money is not flowing in for that. It may flow to other things. I mean, it's going to be an interesting budget year federally. President Trump himself, you probably know that the defense budget is the biggest kind of line item of things that are outside of quote unquote entitlements or interest on the debt. And the defense budget has been creeping up, and it's about to hit $1 trillion a year. And President Trump has announced over the last couple of years, or over the past couple of weeks, that he wants to up that budget to $1.5 trillion. He wants to up it by 50%. $500 billion extra dollars, right? All of that money is going to be borrowed. It's all going to be paid for one day by your children, your grandchildren, their children, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. But that's money that's going to be spent on that. If I find it next to impossible to believe that the budget would be that high, but the Republicans in Congress are going to work to up it a lot. And it's just like in the 1960s with the guns or butter debate during Vietnam. It's like money spent in one thing is money that's not going to be spent somewhere else.
Do you know by comparison what China and Russia spend on defense?
The U.S. spends by itself more than the next 10 countries in a row spend combined, including China and Russia. Now, Russia's has gone way up because of the war in Ukraine. Russia spends a huge proportion of its budget on the war in Ukraine, but its economy is absolutely falling apart right now.
I just want to say something about the question that was raised about the local, how it impacts local. Aside from budgets, I think there's a cultural shift around meanness.
Yes.
And I also think that a lot of towns in our area are dealing with very volatile meetings about controversial topics. I think the role of social media also plays a huge role in the anonymity of, violence and that sort of thing. But I also wanted to mention that I think that chaos is a big part of all of this too. And I think that the focus on like Epstein or the price of gas, the price of food, and those are the things that matter to people, but they're being stuck under because of all the chaos and all the terrible things that are happening in the world. I do think people collectively have a lot more power than we often realize. And I think that if we're saying that what matters to us is affordability and the price of food and all that kind of stuff, I think that we can continue to speak out about those things and demand that media pays attention to those things. Because everybody goes to the grocery store, we know that the food prices are not going down.
Yeah.
So I just feel like we do have a lot more power sometimes than we collectively realize.
I think that's really well said. That's really well said. And I also agree with you about the first part that you said. You know, I teach 18 to 22-year-olds. They were born in like 2007, right? And so many of them, they just think this is normal because they don't know anything different. And so, we all learn about how to behave when we watch television or see our political leaders and how they speak. And so it's not surprising you go to school board meetings and people are screaming into the microphones and the like because they've learned this somewhere. Yeah.
Seems like a lot of what's going on is purposefully making our institutions dysfunctional so people stop believing them.
Right.
And that's a planned approach and supports, unfortunately, going in the wrong direction. I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think among certain people that's absolutely true, that they would like certain things to fail, and so they work to try to make them fail, and then say, see, this is no good. We can't do that. I don't think it's everybody. I think there are some real problems that people are genuinely trying to fix that are really hard to fix, for sure. But absolutely right.
Yeah. So a lot of us go to protests. We go to No Kings Rally. We go ice out. I mean, tell me there's value in that, other than making us feel good.
Yeah.
That I hear this number of like once it gets up to 3.5 million people, you can really have emotion and movement.
Oh yeah, I struggle with this myself a lot. I think we're all trying to figure out about like if we don't like how things are going, what can we do that matters? Where I've kind of landed, and I don't have any particular wisdom that other people don't have. I think one, you're right that part of mobilizing and protesting, however you do, part of it is to feel like you've done something and to know that you're part of a community as well, that there's a good feeling about being in a collectivity like that. In terms of efficacy, I don't think President Trump and the Trump administration care if we go to a No Kings rally. I really don't. But I do think that some other people care. And for me, one of the biggest failures, I've already said it, but I'll say it again, has been among the elites. And among elites who are not actually true believers in what the Trump administration is doing, but they're kind of going along for one reason or another. Those are the people we need to put pressure on. We really do. And, I don't know that, Jamie Dimon, head of JP Morgan Chase, is going to answer my email if I write to him. But I do think that there are elites in every community and at every level And I think if enough of us don't just put pressure and try to say, hey, no kings, but actually try to put pressure on our members of Congress or our civic leaders or our business leaders, to me, it's our best hope of having something happen. But again, no guarantees, right?
Do you think there's any chance at all, when in military leadership who have talked about their oath being to the Constitution and not to the president? I don't know how much change there has been, and I don't know what that would even look like.
Yeah.
But I just wonder, do you think there's any chance at all that, given what the blatantness of what's happening, that
Wow. I think things would have to be really bad. The
they
military,
are really
the upper
bad.
echelons of the military is a black box. I don't think we really know what's going on in the upper echelons of the military in terms of like generals and admirals who undoubtedly are highly patriotic, love this country, and we can assume that a proportion of them are really troubled by what's going on. We're using the military domestically.
Right.
That is not an easy thing to accept in the United States of America. There have been, and military leaders and people in the military have been trained over that and about the civilian military break in politics very seriously for decades and decades. And so for any military person to actually, I don't know, speak out, somebody who's actually in service. I mean, I do think that, there's room for a lot of retired people who are elites. My wife and I were talking about, former presidents of both parties. Where are they? Where are they? I mean, if Bill Clinton says something by himself, it just doesn't matter. But if all living presidents, former presidents, get together and really issue a strong statement, or, the sort of, heroic retired military people, similarly, if they would actually together speak out more. I mean, I think it's more incumbent on those kinds of people to kind of get the attention of people who are a little bit maybe more on the fence to say, this isn't normal.
No incumbent president endorsed him,
Oh, but that's
former president,
that's a whole different
endorsed
thing.
him.
That's a whole different thing.
Do you think you're afraid of
Yeah.
being attacked by them?
It didn't matter.
I don't know. I can't get inside their brains. I honestly don't know.
You have that wall of presidents and all these little quotes on it. He's the greatest one we've ever had.
Yeah.
Just ask them.
you're making a lot of noise.
Take this up to speed. I've been thinking about something recently, and then seeing the photo of the January 6th flags and seeing the flag on the top of the flyer for this very event. This thing's kind of stuck out to me recently, where I've noticed that the right took the U.S. flag and made it their own, and then this room on some level is afraid to fly that flag because it represents something else now. And what is this situation where the American flag is no longer ours? It doesn't represent everyone. We're afraid of it. They have sort of made it their own. MAGA made the U.S. flag the MAGA flag, essentially. And there's an iconography discussion there that's really strange.
No, I think you're right. I don't think it's new, and I think it predates Trump.
Yeah.
I associate it mainly with the Tea Partiers. That really kind of came out around 2010, 2012. There was a very, everything was about stars and stripes and the like. And I think that others who were maybe not within that camp on the right, for whatever reason, sort of surrendered the flag. But I do think that there have been efforts for sure to recapture that. And to, you go to No Kings rallies or other kinds of things. You see a lot of American flags that are there. So I think they're, it's an evolving thing is I guess all that I would say.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. Yeah.
Some of my viewpoints or whatever. I mean, I often wonder, would we be here with Trump if Obama hadn't won in 08? Because there was such deep-seated racism in Congress that fought Obama on so much first term, and he got in a second term, but we had the Great Recession in 08, 09, like they were throwing spaghetti at the wall because this country was about to go off the cliff. And Tim, what's his name, wrote about it, wrote a book, and they really were scrambling. And meanwhile, there was a Congress that wasn't doing a whole lot to help Obama. And then he won second term. Like, would Trump have even been thought of in 15, 16, because that was the next president to be elected was after that.
Yeah.
Was after 2 terms.
It's an interesting question for sure. I think one could argue both sides of it. I happen to be persuaded by your side. I think Trump gaining the presidency in 2016 had everything to do with Obama. I absolutely do. He made himself relevant again, not just with The Apprentice, but with the birth certificate, the birther conspiracy.
And that was him.
He made himself relevant through the birther conspiracy. And of course, the birther conspiracy was code, right? Obama, he's a black man. He can't be president. He can't be a real American. That's really what it was about.
Yeah, for sure. But he had won 2 terms at that.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. But it brought Trump a lot of notoriety and got him kind of center
And
stage. again.
anti-establishment.
Yeah.
People that were against the established Republicans, Trump was fresh, and he was anti-establishment against the established Republicans. So.
For sure.
And
for
so
sure.
then he
Drain the
was
swamp.
anti against the Democrats.
Yeah.
So you had people that, he was their man because,
Yeah, he captured the Republican Party in the first term, for sure. You're right.
Michael, so historically, if you look at our government, it typically has sort of what she's talking about. There's a swing that happens, right? It's very left, it becomes very right, and then it feels like it eventually it swings back and forth. Is that something that's accurate, or is that just an observation?
It's not always totally accurate. So, I mean, maybe at the presidential level, we witness that a little bit more. But like, if you look at Congress from the New Deal, the 1930s, up until 1980, the Democratic Party dominated Congress. Over and over and over again. There might be 2 years here where maybe the Senate went Republican, or maybe some other 2 years a decade later where the House went Republican, but it was overwhelmingly Democratic. At the presidential level, we'd sometimes have these swings. And I think, as people are just sort of generally less happy with government and I think more deeply are less upwardly mobile, because that's been a big change in our society as a whole since 1980, that I think people blame it on government. So at the presidential level, I do think that there's more anti-incumbent bias.
Right.
People will, if gas prices are high, of course, it can't be because of what's happening in Saudi Arabia or a war going on somewhere else that produces oil. It's the president's fault. Right. I'm going to vote for the guy who's running against him, or whatever, or some other reason, right?
So how about 2 more questions? And because I think there's so much that we could keep on talking about, and I don't know what the answers are, but I certainly appreciate you being here and helping us walk through this. But let's take 2 more questions. And
So I was going to sort of build on something that was asked a little earlier and spoken about. It seems to me that modern day, and I've lived a long time, modern day, we have a different kind of media. We have social media. We have instant information that goes out.
Yeah.
And worse, we have AI. And I think those things lead to all the lies and all the distortions, and that contributes to this, it's somebody's going to lie, like our president lies all the time. If they're going to do that, some people are listening and believing the lies because it's published or because it's worse, it's
Yes.
on social media.
Critical thinking.
Exactly. I mean, I think that we now treat media as a smorgasbord, right? I'm going to take a couple of those, but I don't like that.
Right.
And so I'm just going to have the things that I like. Right? We all do it, right? Because that's the mediascape that we live in. Let me kind of answer your question with that, but also go back to your question if I were the ruler of the world, if I were king. Here's what and I could change anything. I mean, there's a lot of deep-seated things that are wrong with American politics right now and American society right now that have kind of produced this perfect storm. And the reason I want to bring it up now is because one of them is our mediascape. That does include AI. That we're at the tip of the iceberg, and it's terrifying with all the, fake stuff that's going to be coming out, not just in terms of stories, but videos. We won't be able to believe our own eyes. What people say, being able to imitate people's voices, et cetera, et cetera. So our mediascape, which is concentrated and is for profit, and people know what sells in the media. And controversy sells, and us being pissed off sells. And so they'll give us more of that because we'll read more of it and we'll watch more of it. So there's that. Deeper seated issues that we don't talk about at all. One of the things that we don't like to talk about in the United States is income and wealth inequality.
Bernie talks about it.
Okay, Bernie. Accepting Bernie. Thank you. We live today in a Gilded Age. The amount of inequality that we have in the United States is only paralleled by the 1890s. And we act like it's normal. And that's deeply problematic for our political system as well, because a lot of people are frustrated with making ends meet. And we don't want to talk about people at the very top getting most of the gains of our economy. So instead, it's a lot easier to say, I blame the immigrants. They're taking my job. They're, if you listen to the Trump administration, they're making housing more expensive. They're driving up our rents. That if we would just get rid of these immigrants, we'd all live happily ever after. Right? It's a simple kind of answer to that. When in fact, that's a really big problem. Add a couple more to them, and then I'll stop with that. Third one is money in politics. That is kind of a subset of number one. Since we've gone to Citizens United, but even before then, we are screwed as a democracy. We are ever closer to becoming a plutocracy. Money doesn't buy political office, but if you don't have money, you don't have a chance.
Right.
And that's true too. And then lastly, I want to talk about, if we would go back to Robert Pape, one of the things that I got really interested in his work was because he did with his lab this very data-driven deep dive into who got arrested at the attack on the Capitol. He wanted to know what cross-section of America were the people who not just showed up, but committed crimes at the Capitol. 1,600 of them. They're indicted. We know who they are. We could actually look at who they are demographically. Who do you think they are?
Police officers, veterans.
Say again?
Police officers, veterans.
Veterans, yeah.
Wrong.
Wrong.
There are some, you bet. We read about them.
Highly educated people.
A lot of highly educated people, a lot of professionals, not disproportionately from the South,
White supremacists.
not necessarily white supremacists, not necessarily all Republicans or on the right or militia members or the like. The main finding that they came, say again?
Former Democrats.
Former Democrats. The main finding that they found, they came from all over all 50 states, a lot of blue states, a lot of suburbs. And the main finding that he and his group found was that the single biggest commonality that they had was that they were from counties that were experiencing the highest amount of demographic change racially and ethnically in the country. The more that your county was changing, the more likely you were to not only be at the Capitol that day, but to be pissed enough to commit a crime. Interesting finding, right? Interesting.
So they were against people that they felt were getting more than they were getting.
I think a lot of them are angry with the way, I mean, they could voice it in different ways.
No, that should
That-
be, why are they doing it?
Yeah, maybe the government's taking care of other people, they're not taking care of me. When I've been waiting in line for a long time. Yep, all of those kinds of things. You can, the specifics of it could vary a lot. One last thing, and then I'll go to you. The other thing that they had in common when they were asked why they did it, this was on social media, when they would report to other people, or what they said in courtrooms and the like, they said, why were you there? Why'd you commit those crimes? The most common answer they gave was, because the president told us to. Go ahead.
I'm waiting for a listing of the 1,600 that were pardoned compared to ICE agents hired within the past year. Yeah, I want to see how many became ICE agents.
It's a wonder all of them.
You'll never see it.
Thanks so much. Thank you all. Thank you. Thanks, Bruce. Much appreciated.